Welcome to our evangelism series and just how sharing our faith has a ripple effect. And we were just talking about, like what evangelism looks like for us, and also what we don't like, how it looks like, for the world, and how it's been done to us. It's been a little bit negative. My question to you now is how does the Elm do evangelism? I'm looking more for the principles of how you think the Elm practices evangelism and how we share our faith. What do you think are some principles that we practice here at the Elm Church?
I think at the Elm, it needs to start with hospitality and gentleness, because we need a space to feel safe and to feel welcome so that the stories can be shared. And the gentleness part comes in where it's not being pushed. You're not trying to have an agenda, and so that meal isn't just for show, just so that someone can reach their goals of converting you or something. So being gentle and having that space to share stories.
Good. I have a few thoughts. So when I first came to the Elm, I was a member first. I did not come to the Elm as a staff or any kind of leadership position. I came as a member first. And the very first thing that I felt when I stepped into this place was that people were very intentional, and there was this relational aspect. And I'm not just talking about yeah, of course, every church should be relational, right? But there was this really intention where it's people really wanted to genuinely know who I am, my family. There was a super warm, welcoming feel, and that automatically made me feel safe. There's this felt safety that was just lurking in the space here, in the people. So it was very interesting how, that was my first experience at a church. Because a lot of times when people go to church for the first time, there is a sense of guardedness, rightly so, right? You should be, oh, you don't know these people. But for me, as I stepped in, there was something about the atmosphere that allowed me to put my guard down, that it was okay to do that, So for me, I feel like when it comes to the Elm doing evangelism or sharing faith, it's less about the things that people are saying here, but it's about the environment that people are creating here that allows us to feel safe and to be a little bit open, So I think there's an element of that at the Elm for me, because that was my personal experience, Yeah.
I feel like as you were sharing about you first walking to the church with your family, I was imagining myself the first few times I walked into different churches all over the world. And I can remember, and not just churches either, just space in general. I can remember almost every instance where I was looked at and then the person walked away. Or someone made eye contact with me and then intentionally, I'm gonna walk somewhere else, so to avoid that contact with me. And that was deafening to me. The way that made me feel was just so unaccepted, unwanted. And again, this doesn't have to be a religious setting. It could be in a school, in a classroom, the cafeteria. And even young children, they know when they're unwanted, and that quiets them. So when you were sharing that, I think that a very important part of the Elm's way of evangelizing is to not turn away from someone who's coming in. I would say that's one of our principles, when someone comes in, to welcome them in.
I was just thinking about what you guys are sharing, and I went, that's something I always forget. Is there's a way in which we don't assume to know someone's story that has always been a powerful component of how we share faith. When I first met Lester, he didn't assume I had my life together, because I think sometimes when people hear, oh, you're a pastor, then maybe your faith life is all put together. And my life was not put together at that time. I was not feeling like I understood where God was leading me and what my next steps were. I was definitely afraid of that next ministry position I was going to take. I felt like I was coming from a place where I had just been really burned and hurt, and I didn't want to go through that again. And so I felt all sorts of chaos inside of me and fear. And then I meet this guy, Lester, and he's like, hey, so I want to like hire you to do something. I'm like, you don't even know me. I'm like, I don't know you. I'm like, this is terrible. And I honestly was thinking I should probably say no.
But you did. He did, and then he judged me. He thought I should have had it all together.
Unsaved people do.
I'm like, yo, I'm just trying to have a beer with you right now, and you coming at me.
And then he invites me over to this beer and Bible thing, and it was supposed to be 2 weeks, turns into 2 months. And as I'm like sitting there at beer and Bible, like what I took away from it was, this is a place where no one is assuming that I have everything together, and they're just allowing everyone to share and be heard. And I just felt so much community there. And I mean, I remember that first year of beer and Bible, we had so many pastors in transition who would come to beer and Bible just to rest.
Oh, wow.
Because they felt like it was this unassuming community that was safe. And I definitely felt that on the front end when Lester approached me, and I think of that and go, that's what the Elm is. We have this community where we don't make assumptions about where you are. We won't force you to share your story, but we're not going to make assumptions about your story. And when you're good and ready to share it, people will be willing to hear it without immediately putting you into a box, into a category. Oh, that's your story. I know that. I've heard it 1,000 times. No one's going to say that. They're going to listen to it. And it's so intentional that it allows people to really show up. I mean, I was just reminded of that.
I was actually just thinking, like, I imagine if Jesus like rolled his eyes when he saw a newcomer. You ever seen that? Or like he assumed, like, why didn't you get your life together? I was imagining, I was like, I really love how we are really thinking about how to redefine the principles of evangelism. Just because I think that word is like really, there's a heaviness to the word where almost it's negative. It almost has a negative feeling to it. Yeah. And I feel like people, even my non-Christian friends will be like, oh, the evangelism means there's gonna be a track, and you're gonna come to my doorbell, and you're going to bother me, and then you're gonna invite me to some kind of a meal, and then you're gonna like convert me. But it's not
predatory.
It's so yes, and we were just talking about how in Queens, that's very unsafe for us. You cannot do that here. So in our context, it really has to change. And at the Elm, our principles is felt safety. It is hospitality. It is gentleness. It is being patient. It is walking with somebody, getting to know them, sharing stories. It is not coming at you with the gospel, because it actually is so much more than that.
Right.
I just thought to myself, while you're sharing, like if you told me, yo, Dave, there's a bunch of street evangelists at the end of the block, there's a feeling I get. I'm thinking, I'm going to cross the street. I'm going to walk on the other side. I don't want to walk through a group of street evangelists. There is this negative feeling. Yes. It's become a thing where you don't want to be near it. Yeah. Like there is that. I don't know. Maybe it's just me.
No, it's true. And that's what a lot of people associate evangelism with.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right? Like, or even sometimes if I'm walking through the mall, I'm like, oh, there's a Christian with the tracts, and I gotta run away. Like, it's just a bad feeling. It's like, you don't know me. You're selling me something. That's what it is. It's like you're a salesperson. And I'm like, I need to get away from you, because this is nothing to do with you getting to know me. It's all about almost like you, like bringing your status up because you're counting how many people you've spoken to. Like, oh, there's one, I'm gonna tally it off, and there's another person, and that's another project I need to get it off my end. And I'm like, oh, I don't want to be that project. I think we had mentioned that earlier. What other principles do you think there are that the Elm Church has been practicing when it comes to evangelism?
I think humility for me. There's something about knowing that we don't have a claim on our neighborhood more than anyone else, and that we can't do the work of loving our neighborhood by ourselves. And so there's this posture that says, hey, we need everyone in our neighborhood, as many as we can gather, whether they're Christian or not, to be the neighborhood that we want to be. And so humility teaches us to listen to our neighbors who maybe even disagree with our faith, but to listen in a way where we're curious, where we're not jumping to conclusions, and there's a willingness for us to break bread together and eat with them and love the same city with them. That humility, I think, is woven into our evangelism. Yeah, and it has to be, because I mean, our gift to our neighborhood is that we have the gospel. Outside of that, we're not saying that we know more or we have more than our neighbors. What we have to share with our neighborhood is given to us by God. And it just so happens that our God has given our neighbors gifts, and we call those gifts common grace, gifts that we need from them to live the lives that we live. And I mean, we just went through a whole pandemic, right? That those vaccines and those studies that brought out those treatments, they were not produced by the church. They're produced by people outside the church who just are in the sciences, and they came up with things that we needed to take care of the city. There's so many resources that we tap into that are not part of the church that help us love our neighborhood well. And so I think of that humble posture that says, we're not the solution. We're not trying to be somebody's savior. We are here to work with our neighborhood, to be part of our neighborhood, to mobilize more people in our neighborhood to make this a better place. So yeah, humility for sure.
I think as you were saying that, I was like, people who are know-it-alls and they feel like they have the solution to everything. For example, the gospel, and that's all you're throwing at me. It's almost like I just don't want to hear it because you're a know-it-all. Like you're a know-it-all in this gospel context. And as I'm like, oh, I don't want to hear that because it's so off-putting, and they're not humble at all. It's like there are people like that, and I feel like that's why it's important that here as a principal to be humble is important, because when you give off that I know-it-all attitude, well, I don't want to be around you now. So I just want to now. For me, I want to fight you.
That's very Queens. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, I want to fight you now because you know everything.
Yes.
In this context, I think for Christians, I think a lot of Christians are like, well, for me to evangelize, I must know everything about the gospel. But when you come with that posture, you're still coming as I know it all posture. And now I'm like, I need to get rid of you because you're not safe. You know nothing about me, but yet you're trying to like recruit me.
No, as you said that, I'm thinking about the different encounters that I had too. I feel like I've gotten into arguments with a lot of Christians. Almost just playing devil's advocate. I'm almost not even really defending the faith anymore, but in a way I really am. Like at that point, I'm just like, you're using the Bible to push your agenda and your beliefs. Now I just want to be on the other side. But sometimes it's just, it is really bitter when people do that, when they think they know, when they have the secret potion to solve all your issues. Once you believe, your life will be great. So you'll have success, wealth, health, and everything. And yeah, it does get me into that fight stance as well.
Yeah.
Right, and a know-it-all is never thinking to learn. And so it's always like this looking down on other people, looking down your nose at them. So you're not even listening when they're talking. To say that we know the gospel doesn't mean that we know everything there is to know.
Right.
And so once we have that posture, then people are not sharing and we're not going to learn from them. I think we have so much to learn from other Christians who we sometimes disagree with. And we have lots to learn from all the religions that call Elmhurst home. And so like when we listen, we're able to ask good questions and learn more even about our own faith, as we kind of compare notes and say, okay, why is it that motivates you to do what you do? What's the heartbeat of your faith? And there's a lot to cherish if we have that posture of humility. Of course, the gospel is the gospel. We teach the gospel. We have to share the gospel, but that doesn't mean we can't listen to our neighbors when they're sharing something that is not the gospel.
Yeah. I think another principle as you're speaking that I thought about are two things actually, and they might conflict with each other, but I think of urgency and also patience. So there is an urgency that I believe we understand that one, we're never promised another day to live, right? So therefore, we're always doing life with people. And like our the way we share our faith here at the Elm, I feel like there's this urgency that we're not just seeing each other like on Sundays, but it's throughout the week. But there's also patience where we know that people don't just convert overnight.
Right.
You know, you almost have to wait and be there with them and do life with them, not knowing it all, you know, and to not know it all means I have to just walk with you and also get to know your story. And so I really feel like those two principles also work really well here, you know, at the Elm, where we understand the urgency, but we're also very patient, knowing that this isn't in our hands, but that the Spirit is doing something in that person's life. Therefore, you know, like be humble and learn about this individual, you know, finding them where they are and then just bringing them to Christ that way.
Yeah, I can think of several conversations I've been part of where you were talking to someone and you actually, Lester, you would just tell them like, hey, you know, there's going to be ups and downs. And you almost like name it for them. Because you're saying that they're probably going to have this like moment of, you know, second guessing or stumbling or whatever you want to call it. And you're just saying, hey, look, it's going to happen. And we're all used to that. We all know that. Yeah. So don't think that we're going to be impatient with you, that you have to like hide that part of you. Like we're going to walk with you through the highs and lows. It's going to get really, it's going to get confusing at times. There's going to be twists and turns, but this is a patient thing that we're all a part of, where we all walk with each other. We don't expect everyone to follow this straight linear line, you know.
I loved all those principles that we just shared. And I gotta say, I think a lot of it has to do with just doing relationships with people, right? Like, I think like all of that encompasses that. So which leads me into like, what do you think are some practices that we do here well when it comes to evangelism at the Elm Church?
Again, so I came to the Elm as a member, but before I came to the Elm, I did a whole bunch of research on the Elm. I read all of your values. I watched all of your videos on YouTube.
And now you're in one of them.
Yeah. On YouTube, there's a bunch of videos for the Elm. You could, you know, I think that's where I learned. Sandy does like some kind of, dolphin noise or something, you know?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, so so the thing was that when I was, you know, when us as a family knew that God was calling us out and transitioning out from our church, you know, we stumbled upon the Elm. Again, we didn't know people here, but for me, when I was reading the values, okay, it's like, oh, good, great values, okay. But then it wasn't just the values, but it was the implementation of the values that you guys were doing for me at the Elm. Like I saw like during the pandemic, you know, because in my mind, like this is a church plan. The church is small. But how are they doing all of these things, you know, for the city and all this? And for me, when I was looking for a church, like I wanted to be part of a church that's super embedded in the community, that's for the community, that when they hear about the Elm Church, they know that this is a church that loves the neighborhood, you know. So when that was my first like, oh, I think this is where the Lord is calling us to.
I think to even like add to that, I'm sorry, but to even add to that, like how we took City Mission as one of our arms now, like another entity in the neighborhood, a nonprofit, like to understand that that's our mercy and justice arm now, you know, and that our church, the board of City Mission is now made up of people from the church. That's also a huge practice, just working through an entity that does a lot of the city positive things in the neighborhood is a huge thing that I feel, which I was just adding on to what you're saying.
Yeah, I mean that's huge, because we're saying we're not settling for the. I mean, we were already doing a lot, because city positive isn't an aspirational value for us; it's a core value. So it's gonna bleed into everything that we do. It's already there, but to take on another entity like City Mission, it just goes to show how much more we want to dream, how much more we want to do, because we're creating this bigger platform for more people to get involved. I'm excited for it.
Yeah, absolutely. And like just thinking about that, like a great example, I feel like for us being evangelistic, right? is that like even with when we took upon city mission and all these things, it's like even the human trafficking like workshop that we're doing next Friday through city mission is doing, right? It's like when we even look at that, it's like human trafficking is so evident in our community, in our neighborhood, right in front of us. But why is it like nobody tapping into that? Why is no church just partnering with anybody to try to tap into that? Yeah. But it's like we're doing that. Why? We really care. We really love. It's an issue. It's a problem, right? People are being affected by it, and we're willing to step into that place with city mission together, right? And for me, it's like when I see those things, like like this is how we're evangelizing, and because there's this already feel of like, our principles. It's like, it's like such a great opportunity for people to really be part of this greater thing that we're doing. So I don't know. So it's like, for me, I just see those things and I get very excited. And I feel that's how we do evangelism well.
Like what we do for our city adorns the gospel message for people.
Absolutely.
One thing that I see the Elm doing well in sharing their faith is looking ahead and listening to diverse opinions. And I look at the core team and all the past members of it. I think our strengths are so different, and oftentimes we clash. We see different sides of the same coin, and I feel like by having such a diverse team, we're able to look ahead better and plan for the future. And by planning for the future, we're putting things in place. We're creating mechanisms in a church where we can share our faith better, have more spaces to share. And I think that's one of the indirect ways that we share our faith, putting things in place, because without it, there wouldn't be it. And so, yeah, I feel like the way we strategize and look ahead, listen to each other, listen to the people in our congregation, it allows us to look ahead and plan for the future.
I think that's a great point. I mean, if we start from the inside out in terms of holding different, strengths in different people and how they see things, we're going to extend that out to our church where people are going to do evangelism differently. There's different giftings that are going to be employed because it's a reflection of the center of the church in terms of our leadership. We have so many different people. Like you and I are very different. And one thing that I've really come to appreciate about our practical approach to evangelism is something that I feel like you've really spearheaded in the last year, Lester, with all of the counseling workshops and resources that were brought in. It wasn't like we had a bunch of people who were wrestling with their own grief and we just told them to bury that and talk about Jesus. That's not our approach. Practically, there was so much that we put into these counseling workshops, counseling subsidies. We have a mercy fund. We have a grief fund. We have so many resources to help people in the day-to-day real needs of life in terms of like processing what they've gone through, the grief that they're currently dealing with, processing. And because we do that, they're able to share their faith from a place of health and not from a place of burying their past.
That's good.
That's definitely a practice for us where people can show up with authenticity and vulnerability, and we're equipping that because we're helping them process where they are, where they've been as an authentic, vulnerable person with these counseling resources.
Yeah. I actually feel like there's two parts to this that I really feel is a huge practice for us here. One is to receive counseling and to get these workshops. And I'm just gonna name drop Redeemer Counseling. Yeah, like Judy Cha, Ellen, Josue, my personal counselor, they've just been amazing. And I think they're just a gem that we found, and they're mainly in Manhattan, but to have that in Queens and a diverse neighborhood like Elmhurst is very rare. So to have them support us here is just such a blessing. And the reason why that's been really helpful for us as a practice is that I do believe that if we have so much garbage in our lives that we're going through, I am not going to be looking outward. I will only be looking inward. Like my maybe it could be like a family issues, or maybe someone's going through divorce, or maybe their child is really sick, or they're losing their job, or all these things. It's all inward. If it's not being dealt with, especially in the immigrant neighborhood, and this is why it's very different here. We are raised with trauma. So the way we deal with all of our external stress or even internal stress is all these inward, shove it down, don't talk about it, no emotions. And it becomes very unhealthy. But when that happens, now I am a mess inside and it becomes an internal storm. And what do? Some people, they'll get very distracted. They need to just keep working. They need to be, always doing something. Some people need to hide. They just don't want to see anybody. Some people are always, just making sure that they're entertaining. I'm a huge entertainer. So when I do that, I just need to see people. And as long as they're happy, I'm good. But what's happening is I don't really take the time to see what's happening in the neighborhood. So when it comes to sharing my faith, evangelism, forget it, because I'm distracted, I'm hiding, I'm being busy, because there's so much crap happening inside that I can't undo. So I think that's one way how these counseling workshops is very helpful as a practice here at the Elm. I think two, I've also seen that these counseling workshops and even getting counseling ourselves has been really helpful with dealing with strangers, So I think one way, old school style evangelism is just, telling them the gospel and they're running away. Now I get to learn amazing skills, like reflective listening, mirroring, validating, asking good questions, that doesn't sound accusatory. And now a stranger hears that and they're like, oh my gosh, I feel like I just sat in a counseling session. Who are you? And I get that a lot. We sit at the roastery and I love talking to strangers. And these questions help me now guide the conversations. Whereas before I was always taught, just share the gospel. And I'm like, well, I hate that because it sounds so fake. So I think those are two things that I think we do well here when it comes to counseling practice, or when it comes to evangelistic practices, that counseling has been really helpful with.
Can I just, I love that first point that you made about the fact that in Queens and in Elmhurst, we are raised with trauma. And I was just thinking about the youth program that Dave Lee ran this past summer, and you were leading the students through their adverse childhood experiences, and it was an average of 5. That, there's a number there, 5, and that's a huge number. So when you say that we are raised with trauma, you're not exaggerating.
Right.
That is our neighborhood, and so many of us have learned to cope with that by burying it, and we're disconnected from ourselves. And how important that is for evangelism, because you can't share with other people your faith, which is essentially a form of connection.
Right.
You can't connect with other people if you're not connecting with yourself. And so counseling has to be this resource that we provide, and we do in practice provide it, so people can connect with who they are, their story, get to a place of health in processing that, so that they can connect with others in a place of health.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I really hope people heard that. Connecting with others is really an option, but connecting to yourself is a must.
Yes.
Or else you have no idea what's happening outside of yourself. Yeah. What other practices are you seeing at the Elm that you think has been helpful when it comes to evangelism?
I mean, I'll tell I'll just talk about how ministry obligations have really taken me out of the one-on-one space that I personally enjoy it, but I'm finding less and less opportunity to do it. And one practice that I love about the Elm is we talk about this is a body, and so not we lean on each other. We lean on each other, and so I feel like in this season the church has been more willing to take on the role of what does it look like for us to be the body that goes out and engages people. And so I see a lot of people in our community making those connections, inviting people over for a meal, or grabbing a meal at a local restaurant, or grabbing a cup of coffee at a local establishment, and just making those connections. And it's like, thank you. I feel so thankful because it's not all on the pastoral staff or the staff or the core team to make those connections. I feel like the rest of the community has taken that on, and they're sharing faith and creating those platforms, those connections. Everyone's involved.
Can I ask you guys, I also feel like there's something here with hospitality that we do really well. Like, what are your experiences with how practicing hospitality has been a part of evangelism here at the Elm?
Well, I think for me, it's just like my first Sunday here, somebody invited us over to their house, that family. And we're like, huh? And it was really crazy, because, so that was our first experience with hospitality. They were so open with their homes and.
Wait, let's give them credit. Who was it?
I was just gonna ask, yeah. Cool.
I believe, if I remember correctly, I think it was Mike and Teresa that might have invited us, that reached out to us, invited us over. Yeah. And I was like, we're like, oh, okay. Yeah, so it was like during that same week or something like that. It was crazy because we were so shocked. We're like, oh, okay. But again, because that environment was already there, it's like we were like, oh yeah, sure, and it was a great time to get to know them and the bigger community. So we've definitely experienced a lot of that. People, always like wanting to get to know us, opening their homes. We had an instant connection with like Sandy and Trusty. Going out and eating together all the time. So. For me and my family, we've definitely experienced a lot of that. And because of that, it drives us to do the same for others. But that was possible because we got to experience it for ourselves too, in the short amount of time that we were here. Like it was almost instant, right? It's almost like it's part of like people's DNA here. It's like they don't have to think about it. It's just like a natural thing, yeah, and it's like it's just so encouraging, like to experience that, but to also see that. Like I see Sandy doing that a lot. Like you see her Instagram. I was like, what? I was like, oh, what? That's crazy, It's like, you just see the stories, and it's like you always have constant people over her house and eating with people. I was like, oh wow, great. So I think it's just like, it's just really beautiful to see that.
Yeah, even with a newborn Sandy, the second your baby came out, hospitality. I was like, you really went against the norm, which is great.
Yeah, I just think it's, like I mentioned earlier, it's so deafening when you feel unwanted. And I think that feeling, you can see it on people's faces when they feel unwanted and they feel, maybe I shouldn't be here because I'm weird or I smell or I might say something offensive or, there's so many excuses that we can make for ourselves, for a stranger coming in to make for themselves to not come again. And being hospitable lets them know, I want you in my life. I don't mind you seeing my messy home and all of Java's furs and dust balls rolling around. Like I want you in my life. And I think that's what we're essentially saying when we're inviting somebody into our lives to have a meal, to be messy in whatever we're eating, and just to get really personal with each other. It shows that they are wanted. Yeah, I think that's why hospitality is so important. Plays such a important role in evangelism in the way we do it.
Yeah. The dust ball from Java is her dog, by the way, not her husband or child.
You leave some too.
That's a good clarification.
Yeah. Thank you so much for just tuning in on how we are defining evangelism, especially in our context and in our church. I think it was really fun just to unpack this. Because there's always been this negative connotation, I feel, to like evangelism. There's this pressure of like, I must be out there and I must be a certain way. But we had just said, it's all about being vulnerable and getting to know people, loving them, being generous with them, being hospitable. And all these people that has impacted our lives helped us have this ripple effect onto our neighborhood. So really, really thank you for tuning in. I really hope that this could be a conversation that you would even have with your churches, or even just ask yourselves, what are you doing with evangelism? How are you sharing your faith? Thank you.